win for black voters in North Carolina after 3 Superior Court judges ruled the state's 2018 voter ID law is unconstitutional. 2 of the 3 judges ruled against the law, saying that that evidence showed it specifically targeted voters based on race and was motivated, at least in part, by an unconstitutional intent to target African American voters. The 2018 law was enacted after a supermajority of the state legislature overrode a veto by Democratic Governor Roy Cooper. In their ruling, the judges said, "We do not find that any member of the General Assembly who voted in favor of voter ID harbors any racial animus or hatred towards African American voters, but rather that the Republican majority targeted voters who, based on race, were unlikely to vote for the majority party. Even if done for partisan ends, that constitutes racial discrimination." The ruling is expected to head to a state's appeals court and will not likely be resolved by the midterms. Joining us now to discuss is North Carolina State Representative and former Judge Abe Jones. Representative Jones, walk us through the thinking of the judges and why they say that this was racially targeted.
Well, I didn't talk to any of them personally, but I would assume they know the history of North Carolina and the history of our voter ID law, which was struck down by the Fourth Circuit in 2013. The legislature, which was dominantly Republican, circled back and passed a new law and a constitutional amendment and put it on the ballot in 2018. And that's was considered by the 3-judge panel in September of just this month, and was struck down 2-1 by the panel. That's going to be appealed to the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and it will go from there through the court system. That's the state, which Holmes versus Moore.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is what is the language in the bill? What are the mechanisms in the bill that the judges took exception to?
Well, I think I didn't specifically study that, but they took exception to the effect of the voter ID requirement, which unfairly targets those who can't get the particular IDs in an easy enough fashion. And those IDs aren't supplied by the state. There were certain ones that were named initially in the law. I remember the history of it, and then the people who who passed it initially went back and broadened it up a little bit, so you could use student IDs and this type of thing, just trying to get it through so to be approved as that these IDs are truly accessible. But as you know, many people, older people, don't have IDs. Some like that. Some don't drive. Some just don't have a picture ID in any respect. And so if you don't have a license or you don't have a work card that initially wasn't, then what do you use? And so the courts felt that this was an undue burden on the voting population, and down to it will be appealed by the state. They've promised that, and it will go to the full Court of Appeals in North Carolina, and we see what they will say.
Let's talk about this idea of refinement. What we are seeing across the country is that this is a coordinated effort. This is not one state. It's not just North Carolina. It is a coordinated effort across the country. Many of the state legislatures are working from model legislation, and what they're doing over time is looking at which cases, which laws actually stand, what wording actually can stand in a challenge in the courts. And even if a North Carolina bill goes down, they tweak it a little bit to make sure they remove the thing that is offensive so that they can get it through, as you just said. How worried are you about this kind of overall national push to kind of alienate largely black people, black, Hispanic, some elderly, some college students, anybody who would not vote Republican from being able to vote?
It worries me considerably, Charles. I think that what we need to do, just as we did in the 60s, is attack this on all fronts in churches, in fraternities, sororities, in civic clubs, and say there are people in the North Carolina legislature who don't want you to vote, and they're trying to make it harder. Vote anyway, and get out, teach them because if we depend on the courts, I'm not sure what the courts are going to do, to be honest with you, in the state case. That's set for trial. There's a federal case that's set for trial in January, which is NWC versus Cooper, and the state case has to go to the Court of Appeals first before it makes its way back, perhaps to the trial courts, and that's Holmes v. Moore. But essentially, there's a coordinated effort to suppress black votes. It's clear the effect of everything they do has that intention. Now, they would deny it, of course. I mean, they're not going to admit that, but that's the effect of it. And once the Voting Rights Act got destroyed by the Supreme Court of the United States, and there's no strict scrutiny anymore, it's left to each state to do its own thing. And North Carolina has this battle, and I think if we identified as such and get billboards, get announcements in churches, get announcements in civic clubs, and attack it back, I believe African American peoples and blacks and browns will respond when they realize they're being attacked. But it's all the clever language and all that just has an ultimate objective is to clip off the edges of the black vote so that they can win more elections. That's simple. It's not complicated.
Abe Jones, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Really important story. Really appreciate it.